of 2021 to order. First order of business is to receive information regarding the redistricting plan and adoption process from South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. Mr. Frank Rainwater, I understand, will be presenting us some information.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Frank Rainwater. I am the Executive Director of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office. With me, I have Mr. Victor Frontroth. He's our Assistant Political Cartographer that's responsible for a lot of this information. We do have additional staff back in the office who help provide other statistics and charts in this graph. I'm happy to take questions for you at any time as we go through this process. We are happy to work with you. We have about 30 counties that we are assisting at with some level of, or some degree, varying levels of degree throughout the state. We also have about 15 cities we're working with, in addition to a couple school districts and special purpose districts this early in the process. Any comments you have are welcome. Part of what I'm sharing here is not just for your information, but we also use this opportunity to help with the public. The public's not aware of all the details there, and I appreciate, from a personal standpoint, when you have a public forum like this, it helps educate the public on what's going on. Sometimes redistricting has gotten a bad name in the press, but it doesn't always have to be that way. And the key to that is being transparent and sharing this information in public. So what I would like to go through this report and highlight some of the key elements and key responsibilities of what redistricting is about. We have some data here as far as your county is concerned, and then we'll kind of outline some of the recommendations that we provide to all the counties, or really to everybody that we work with. To begin with, I'm going to focus on page 2 here, kind of outline some of the key things we're going to talk about. But in developing a redistricting, the redistricting process, or in developing a new plan, the key requirement is to maintain one person, one vote. It's a constitutional requirement, the 14th Amendment for equal protection, that everybody's district has about the same number of people in every district. If your district has twice as many people as your adjoining district, then your vote, your constituents, their vote counts about half as much, because it takes twice as many people to elect one person to get their voice heard as compared to a smaller district. And what the courts have said that over regular intervals, like the decennial census, you have to equalize the population. That's kind of a time frame or the measure there in which you go back and try to equalize that population. In addition to the constitutional requirement, we got the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act there is to help protect the interest of a minority group. And you have to respect that, Section 2. Things have changed. The last time we went through redistricting process, the emphasis was on a Section 5 analysis. We were under pre-clearance requirements by the Department of Justice. So 10 years ago, when you adopted your plan, you had to submit that to the Department of Justice for pre-clearance. Now that is no longer the case. You are totally responsible, or without any further oversight, so to speak, for what your plan considers. That is both good and bad. It's good because you don't have to go to another authority to get oversight of what you're doing. It's bad in the sense that if you had the DOJ approval, it made it harder for somebody to sue you if you had a contested case. You could say, well, DOJ approved it. But now I think there's more of an emphasis to make sure that all the counties do this correctly, because you're more at risk to being sued. You don't have that layer of protection. But also, and I'll talk about this, the voting rights example has changed. We're moved from Section 5 to Section 2. So this is the first time districts and states and counties are redistricting under this new requirement, and it's kind of a new ball field here. But in addition to our constitutional and federal statutory requirements, there are things called traditional redistricting principles that all the plans have to adopt. One obvious thing, which seems obvious, but it runs into cases from time to time, you have to make sure your district is contiguous. You can't chop up your district and move from one side of the county, that all parts of your district have to be contiguous. We try to minimize splitting of voting precincts. You want to make it simpler on the voters to understand where they are and what their communities are and where they vote. If you split too many precincts, it just causes confusion. We also try to make sure that your districts are compact. You don't want a lot of, now, it depends on population, but you don't want a lot of funky shapes that trying to draws the court's attention. In the redistricting plans that have been thrown out by the court, it was obviously they did not keep them compact. Where feasible, or not where feasible, but as much as possible, you have to identify what your core districts are and what your communities of interest are. Sitting in Columbia, it's very hard, very easy. We can take this map and we can run the statistics and we can equalize the population and we can move census blocks and we can make everything look good on paper. But what it really misses is that local influence, and that is that community of interest in the core, what is your core districts. Sitting in Columbia, I have no idea what's important in each one of your districts. I have no idea of where that center of that population is that really reflects what's the core of that district. This is especially important because you got some districts that have to give up thousands of people, and you have some districts that have to pick up thousands of people. Again, on a numbers game, we can make that happen, but I don't know if that accurately reflects what your communities of interest are. So that takes a lot of discussion amongst yourselves. And it's certainly one of the requirements there is not in a negative sense, but you have to decide what's important in each one of your districts. And when you gain population, where are you going to try to pull from? What's important in there? So that's something that really takes a lot of local effort. And I will say of the 30 counties and cities we're working with in some form or fashion, you have one of the more difficult challenges because of your explosive population growth. You've got to change, you have to change the lines in a number of districts here. We have a couple of counties we're working on. The growth can be changed between two districts. We can move the line just a little bit and make everything happen. But yours are not the case. Yours is one of the more difficult there. So just to start highlighting, that's the basic principles here. And we'll talk a little bit more here on the next page, on page 3. We have a chart and a table here just trying to illustrate what it means to get one person, one vote. When we talk about one person, one vote, the courts have outlined that you can have no more than a 10% deviation. And when I say deviation, that is the difference between your highest district that is over and your lowest district that has the fewest population, that difference from the mean. So you have a deviation here of 51%. That's the bottom left-hand figure there. What we mean by that is if you look at District 1, you have the highest number of people currently residing in your district. You have a deviation of 36%. And then when I take the next lowest district, number 3, minus 14%, when you add those together, you're at a total range there of 59%. The courts have said that range has to be less than 10%. We recommend going less than 5%. Now that's something that you get to decide on. We try 5% because that's a little bit tighter. If you draw something at 9%, the court may say it's okay, but you can be challenged if somebody takes your same principles but draw it at 3% or 2% and you achieve the same result with all your other communities, you could be at risk there. So we're saying 5% is a tighter standard, but it's something you have to consider given all the other factors. So we see there District 1, you have to give up approximately 14,000, I don't know whose District 1 is, but you've got to give up 14,000 people there. And to me, the way we do it, that's kind of the key there. You've got to give up those and then we start figuring out how to shuffle that down. But you've got other districts, you've got 4 districts that are thousands of people below, so you've got to pick that up. So it'll take time working through the maps based on your principles as you adjust this, because as you adjust one, your numbers change, your percentage changes, but then what is that communities of interest? How far do you have to go, or how narrow does that community have to be in these areas? And then on the right-hand side of the graph there, we just have it more visually. Some people like pretty pictures. If you went to Clemson like me, we like pictures, right? So it's a little bit easier to understand, but the emphasis here is for the public to understand. You've got to give up, District 1's got to give up a lot of people. District 2 and District 5 there have to give up, but then you've got to pull up the other districts there. So we just have here on page 4, we've outlined for you your current districts and where the members are. That's another key factor is when drawing the districts, we want to make sure you know where your incumbents are because we never want to intentionally or even unintentionally place two members in the same district. We try to avoid that at all costs. So the next part, we're talking about the Voting Rights Act here. Under Section 2 now, we have to make sure there's a 3-part test to comply with the Voting Rights Act. You know, are your minority, the first step is, are your minority communities compact enough? Are they succinct enough? If we lived in an ideal world and every, let's see, York County, 19% of your county is minority. That's 1 out of 5. If we lived in a perfect world and one of every 5th house was a minority, you couldn't draw a majority-minority district because there was no way to draw those lines. But that's not the way the communities are laid out. So in looking at that, you have to look at, are they compact enough to draw a district? Do they vote homogeneously? And then is there racially polarized voting in the district? You have to look at this column here, the second to the right, the percent DOJ black. The DOJ standard is black in a black and white mix. So you take those 2 racial categories together, and you see you have one racially minority district there at 52%. When the courts talk about the ability for a minority group, for the ability to represent their constituents, that population in voting has to be somewhere in the 50%. If you get below 50%, you know, you could be a challenge. If you start to put too many in there and take away minorities from another district, that's called cracking, and you are packing, because you're taking away opportunities for minorities to influence another district. But again, it looks like, you know, you've got the opportunity to maintain one district there. Your percentages are pretty low throughout, so I don't see a way to create another district. Because your population has been growing, white population has been growing faster than the black population and your other minorities. So that's another factor you have to take into account. So make sure you take into account and respect the communities of interest as far as they represent the minority communities. Now, all that being said, all this is a balancing test. Even though you have to maintain one person, one vote, you've got some degree of variation on how tight you want to do that. When the courts get involved, they draw it down to one person. We were involved with a school district in about 6 years ago, and the court draw that deviation basically to 0. There was a 1-person difference in the 6 or 7 school boards that were going on. But again, you have to decide, well, how close can you be? How does that work out? How do you maintain minority districts here, your district and that voting precinct? Because you've got a lot of population to shift. And until you take the time and go through each one of those blocks and go through analysis, picking up votes, you've got to make sure you don't distort that. But then also it's a balancing with your communities of interest. We say you don't want to split too many voting precincts, but naturally you're going to have to do some. Cities, it's more difficult. Cities are going to have more because it's a lower geographical area. But with the counties, you're still going to have some splitting of precincts. So you have to balance, well, how accurate do I need to get a 1-person, 1 vote to avoid splitting too many precincts? You know, there may be a practical reason to have a little bit higher deviation so you split less precincts, but that's just something you have to go through as you work through the options on the plan in there. Those are the key issues really to talk about. We have some other reports and just statistical information out there to share. But it's really important for you to talk amongst yourselves, and you got to have some input, let the citizens hear from you on what's important in your community. Obviously, you got major changes going on in this county. And the last thing I'll say to everybody is that the lines have to be drawn somewhere. And no matter how well you draw the line, somebody's going to say, you split my community of interest. Well, that's just going to happen. But you got to balance all these factors and look at everything that you can as a whole, but remember to respect the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment. So, Madam Chair, if there are any other, I'll be glad to take any questions from you or whoever.
Members of council, do you have any questions before we turn it over and let the public ask their questions? Mr. Roddy?
I've heard the term several times tonight, and I've heard it in previous months, being made about one person, one vote. And when the public hears this, the first reaction is that, no, we don't want people voting twice. But that's not what that means.
That's correct.
It can easily be interpreted to mean that. But what you're saying is that your vote over here in this district should mean just as much here as it would in any other district. Kind of explain that a little more. Break it down in layman's term of what
So
that
yeah,
really means.
simple as exact. Yeah, you got some big numbers here. Let's say you're in a small area, and you have one district that has 100 people in it, and you have another district that had 50 people in it. Those 50 people are half as much as that 100 district. It only takes 50 people to elect someone there, as opposed to the other district it takes to elect 100. So those 50 people, they have a greater say, because you both have one member on council. But if it only takes 50 people to elect a person to 100, your voice weighs a lot more. You know, you're 1/50th instead of 1/100th. And of course, as you multiply this and you got 10,000 or 20,000, you can see that dynamic. But yeah, it's about your constituents' voices having the equal say and equal share when you go to the poll is the next district there.
What's the likelihood for, without DOJ oversight, will we be looking at somebody challenging what we come up and draw with?
Well, again, the process, what the courts have said, you know, stick to these principles, make these decisions in advance. The court cases I have read, the courts kind of frown upon when something gets challenged after the fact and you don't make a decision or public disclosure why you drew this district. The court kind of looks at that as a little suspect. It's like, well, that's an excuse. But it's important if you lay out in advance what your criteria is going to be, and that's going to be like your deviation. You can identify, well, it's this school zone is a prime community of interest. We need to make sure we don't split that, or this mill area or work area, that's a prime. We don't want to split that up. When you do that into the advance, the court's going to go back and say, well, you said up front, these were your priorities based on all the input, and this is what you did. So the more transparent you're about it, the better you are. The lower the deviation, the better. But if you get sued, the burden is on the plaintiff to show you did something wrong. So they have a heavier lift going into this. But the more you discuss it, the more you share with it, the more you get to a consensus and evaluate these factors, the stronger you'll be.
And my last comment is that we can draw lines and try to be as fair and equitable across the board. But at the end of the day, regardless of how many people we're able to put in this district or that district, at the end of the day, voting is what really matters.
Yes, sir.
And then you want to have an opportunity to have equal representation, but that's always a challenge. But we can pack people in this district or cut this district short. But if people don't come out and vote, then it's all for naught at the end of the day.
That's right.
That's all. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Rainwater, for those comments, and we appreciate you coming here tonight. Before we let you go, what I'm going to do is, the second item on the agenda is to allow an opportunity for interested citizens to pose questions or comments about the redistricting and plan for adoption. To let folks know who are listening online and who are here today, you will have another opportunity. The way this process works is that there will be an ordinance that requires, just like any other ordinance in the county, 3 readings, a public hearing before it passes. But since we have this opportunity here tonight, and there's some folks in the gallery, if there are any individuals who want to come forward to make any comments or to ask any questions, I certainly welcome you to come do that now. If you'll just come forward and state your name and address and just ask if you want to. Yes, come on up.
My name is James Gable. I live out on Shallow Farms on 49. I heard the gentleman say something to the effect that you didn't want to split communities. Am I right or am I wrong?
The goal is to identify communities of interest. Which ones do you avoid splitting? But naturally, it depends on how you define the community. Somebody's going to get split. The last time in my city election, my neighborhood got split because there were higher priorities. But that's the point. Yes, for council to hear what are the communities of interest, what are they, and evaluate that. But it's not always possible. If you have too many communities, it's impossible to make it all happen. So that's part of the balancing act.
Well, once you have communities here and here, sometimes you're gonna have to break those communities up to have a fair election. That is my point. And I don't know about the demographics. But so far as having a fair election, my opinion is you're going to have to break up some communities. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Damon Nichols, and I am here not only for myself, but to represent my mother and the location that she lives in York County. She is a resident of District 2, and District 2, as well as I believe it's District 1, has experienced explosive growth in the Lake Wylie area, and you might as well say the Clover area to a certain extent. So I guess my concern is how the balance will work out with those two districts, because District 2 bumps sort of to the Fort Mill area, just because of the fact that if you take Charlotte Highway out of Lake Wylie, it will take you to the backside of Fort Mill and Tega Cay. So I guess that's my concern this evening, is that with that explosive growth in those two communities, how that will play out from a redistricting standpoint. And also from the standpoint of African Americans in York County being represented. York County does not have a wide range or should I say spread out of African Americans. It's kind of like we're in clusters, so to speak. So those are my two concerns this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Billy Hackner. I live at 1901 Voyager Road in York. I'm in District 2, so just looking at this information, what I saw today, I hadn't seen much until now, so I didn't really know what was going to be what was going to be presented. I didn't know if y'all will actually present a plan, but what I'm hearing now, there's going to be a plan down the road. We're going to have an opportunity later to comment on it. And I hope that y'all present the plan well in advance of the public hearing and way before the third reading. So everybody will have a good chance to get with our homeowners associations and things like that, so they can discuss it and give y'all good comments, and then have time to change it after you hear the comments. But just what I see here, just a few comments I want to bring up. Like I said, I'm in District 2, which shows what I saw. We were over about 4,000 people, it looked like, but we were under the 10% that required being changing. So I did notice that. Our area, I've only talked with really one other person about it in our area, and that was Barb Cameron. And we talked about a couple of items that just came to mind. We're on the very southern part of District 2, and we adjoin, I think that's District 6, I think is the one next to us. So logically, that our area could get moved to another district. However, we have considered ourselves being in the Lake Wylie area rather than the Rock Hill area. We have things like we have the small area plan entails our area, which is the small area Lake Wylie plan, which has just been, I think, enacted here within the past 2 or 3 years. We have the Parks and Rec tax district that we're in. We also have the land preservation tax district that we're in. So if we get moved to another area, I mean, I'm very concerned that we would have another representative that's really not involved or interested in things that we're paying taxes for. So it gets pretty complicated when you start moving things like that around. We do, right now, we're in the Clover School District. We have a York address. So, and feel like we're in the more the Lake Wiley, Clover area, as far as, the community. So kind of getting moved over more towards the Rock Hill community would be a pretty good change for the group. In our area, there's about 500 homes. We're pretty good size, the whole Allison Creek Road area. And so once we get this plan, once we see the plan that's coming out, we'll try to get with our different homeowner association people and try to get some kind of a feedback to y'all on what we see. But, and then there's another thing too, you got people that's been appointed by the district county council person, and if a district gets changed, then does that mean that person, and that person is on a committee somewhere, does that mean that person's gonna have to pull off of that committee because he's in another district now? So it's just a lot of different things that have to think about. But anyway, I'm sure we will come back once we see the plan, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
That's a good point. That's a good point. If you follow somebody who's currently on the board of commission.
Hello, I'm Porter Oldenbuttle, live on the Allison Creek Peninsula. And basically in layman's terms, can you explain what redrawing districts means? So currently, if we're in York, if our district's redrawn, does that move us to Rock Hill or a different district? Basically, would it affect school systems? Would it affect city taxes? How will it affect us?
Mr. Rainwater, do you mind taking that one?
So, trying to remember his question, going back, it does not affect school districts. It doesn't affect your taxes. It just affects, who you vote for.
So it does not affect, we'd still be considered York County, not?
You're still in York County. It's just which one of these gentlemen or lady do you vote for
On the county council.
on county council? Yes, I don't, yes, right, you have multiple school districts because.
We do. It won't affect
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, some school districts automatically follow the county, but you're not one of those. And then cities are different. We were in Rock Hill last week, and Rock Hill had adopted their own plan.
So things like, so if we're Clover School District, but we're York address,
No,
we still gonna be able to vote on like Clover?
yes,
school
yes,
law?
this only affects who you vote for county council.
That's gonna make a lot of people feel a lot better.
Yeah.
I was hoping to get Lake Wiley folks down in Rocky. I need 5 hours. I need a volunteer or something.
Thank you. I'm Barrett Klein. I live on, as well as these other gentlemen, Allison Creek Peninsula on Enchanto Road. And I'd just like to second what Mr. Hagner said about, our community oriented to the Lake Wiley area and the taxes that we pay to service various things that we voted for over the past several years. And we, would like to continue that. And as well as, just the general sense of community that I think we have and how we orient toward Lake Wiley area, the Clover School District and so forth. So I only speak for myself, but I do know, the neighborhoods there, we have a very tight-knit community, and a lot of these folks would be very concerned if this went further afield than, just simply redrawing the lines. I did want to ask, when would these materials be made available to the public, or will they be?
The benchmark report is available to the public. It should be public information and should be made available based upon with our agenda information.
Okay,
And
so
if
we
not,
post
we'll
it.
make sure that it's up there. Now, just to answer some of the questions back here, we are in informational mode. There is no proposed plan that's up here. Like I told you before, we will end up having, as you see through the rest of our agenda, we have an individual who's coming in to help guide the council, make sure that we follow the resolution once we pass that in terms of the guiding principles. But that will be 3 readings, and it will necessitate a public hearing as well. So additional information will come on the county council on its regular meetings.
Fantastic. And what is the timeline on that? Do we know yet?
We have elections that are coming up, so I think the goal of the council and the goal of county management is to get this process completed before the end of the year, if at all possible.
All right.
we have to do some coordination with the election officials and make sure folks get the information in advance of the election. So the sooner we're able to accomplish that, the better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's going to be dependent upon how we complete the process. And any other comments or questions from the public? Come on forward and you can speak. If you want to speak, you can come forward to the podium.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm kind of a newbie here. I've been here for 3 years, and the reason we moved from Northern Virginia is because we love this area. And so I've taken a special interest in our location. So I have some questions. My first one was like, when are the census numbers going to be provided? And like the other people, like if we're going to be now a different district, how does that affect us? And some of the people have said, you know, regarding school districts and everything like that. This isn't very good, but because of a newbie, like we're on the end of the Allison Creek Peninsula, so that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'll just state your name and give your address just for purposes of the record.
Oh, sure. My name is Leslie Mitchell, and I'm at 2142 Lomita Road in York, and I'm off the Allison Creek Peninsula.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to respond initially, Mr. Rainwater is one that has helped provide the benchmark data information. So the census information was delayed, and the time frame for doing this was due to that information being delayed. But we're moving as quickly as possible to make sure that we get this process moving forward.
Thank you.
Do you have any other comments to add to that, Mr. Rainwater? Anything?
Yes, ma'am. We've had this similar question come up at other meetings. The census data was delayed, and then also the detail of the data is even further delayed. We don't, the lady mentioned gender. We don't have a lot of information on gender. But, but the data is available if you want to go to the census website. But we are currently trying to expand our data holdings, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, there'll be a lot more demographic information on the block level and in the counties. I believe I don't believe we put our website on our presentation. I have to check that, but our website is www.rfa, that stands for Revenue Fiscal Affairs, .sc.gov. And we're trying to, hopefully in a couple of weeks here, maybe early November, to have a little bit more information to help answer questions like that, so you can drill down into your areas and see more of the demographic information. The website, www for RFA, that stands for Revenue Fiscal Affairs, .sc.gov. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the public? At this time, we'll move on to item number 3 under our agenda. Council to consider adopting a resolution approving the criteria by which the redistricting of the York County Council districts. Just so folks at home know that the resolution is not a plan. It's not. We've not been presented with how maps should be drawn and what it should be. It is simply the adoption of the concepts that Mr. Rainwater has already gone through. Those being to adhere to the court-ordered constitutional requirement of one person, one vote, adherence to the 65 Voting Rights Act, to solicit public input, ensure that parts of the district are contiguous, to the extent practicable, ensure that the districts are geographically compact, respect communities of interest, attempt to maintain constituent consistency, and seek to avoid splitting voting precincts. That is what this resolution is. It's adopting those principles. Do we have a motion on the resolution?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we have approved the resolution. At this time, we will move to number 4 under the agenda. Council to consider retaining Joseph Opperman of Opperman Law Firm LLC to assist York County in its redistricting process.
Mr. Opperman had intended to be here tonight, and he is on his way. He may be here any minute. He was stuck in traffic on I-85, so he did.
Welcome to
email
York
me.
County.
He emailed me and said his ETA was 6:30. I see we're a little bit past that. He may be here any minute. We can talk in general terms about his employment. I've spoken with him if you'd like. I'd ask Mr. Kendry, is there any reason we need to be in executive session for that, or?
No, I don't believe there's any reason, just if there are any specific questions council wanted to ask that might be more appropriate in executive session, but essentially you've outlined the role of assistance, as has the chair, and that's principally his involvement. So we can do that in open session.
I will just say this before we have a motion, that Mr. Rainwater actually is familiar with this individual, and their office has suggested that we follow through with this process of hiring a consultant, given the fact that we have delays in receiving the census data and the limited access to staff that you all have if we want to get this done in a more timely manner, that the suggestion was to move forward on that front. I assume Mr. Management and Legal recommend that we do this?
Yes, I've talked to some of his clients in the past. I've had some discussions about the services he would provide for us. I think he does offer, more one-on-one work with council members, or probably more meetings if necessary. Also, probably a quicker turnaround. I don't know that Mr. Rainwater's given us a date, but I think Mr. Opperman has referenced that he could probably have this wrapped up by the end of the year, based on what you were asking. So based on that, and the cost is not significant in terms of what the importance of it. So I would recommend, if that's your desire, to have it done by the end of the year. That's probably the best route to take. Well, I think he's got an office in Columbia and Greenville, so I'm not sure. He's local as far as the state. He's within South Carolina.
Has it been, it sounds like this is his venue. He's works in that space often. What is his experience?
He does.
Okay.
Mr. Rainwater's familiar with him. I know he's done some work with the city of Columbia. Also, Kershaw County is the reference I got from him, for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he's done this. Seems very knowledgeable on the subject as well.
Right. And so you mentioned cost too. You say reasonable. Is that compared to what other people would charge normally in that?
Well, there's not a lot of consultants in that business. Again, I mean, we talk about costs all the time, so I don't guess there's any problem with talking about that. But his retainer initially was $9,000, and expects to be able to do it for that. But if we do run into hours above and beyond, would be $200 an hour. So he's a practicing attorney, so I would say that's very consistent with what we would expect.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I was here the last time we went through redistricting. I think I was probably the only one that's been here, and it's a very intense process for those of us who wouldn't know how to do it. So obviously, staff can't do it for us. We're gonna have to have someone provide those services, because we don't wanna take this on amongst ourselves or put it on staff, and we definitely wanna make sure we avoid those pitfalls that will land us obviously being challenged or in court and further delay this process. I do like the fact that we were able to meet individually, and I'm sure that's probably going to be an option with Mr. Opperman, to meet individually to discuss our numbers, the boundaries, the territories, the communities of interest. So I definitely think obviously hiring a consultant to kind of oversee this process for us and walk all of us through it again.
We might have talked long enough to get him in the door.
That was my goal, Rob. That was my goal. That was my goal. So he's right on cue, right on cue. But yeah, definitely have an outside consultant, and obviously $9,000 or whatever the retainer fee and that he's going to work off of is obviously a small fee in some sort, but definitely look forward to make sure we do it and do it right the first time and try to avoid any pitfalls that may cause a hiccup in the process. So obviously, we definitely need a consultant for it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? I think we need a motion.
Well, do we want to,
Like-
if that is him, do we want to hear from him? or-
Do we need a motion in a second? Let's go ahead and get them up here after that. Mr. Opperman, welcome. We've been talking about you behind your back. We understand you've run into the York County traffic.
It was a little
Blessing.
bit of Greenville and Spartanburg County, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, good. We've had some brief discussion about the need for us to move forward with this. County management and legal suggested that we move forward, as did Mr. Rainwater and his office, in order to make sure that we're able to get this done as soon as possible to avoid voters being confused about where they need to move forward. If you'd like to step up and provide any additional information, we'll certainly take that into consideration. At this point, council is considering retaining you to assist in the process, and that's basically where we are.
Madam Chair, I think,
If you'll come up to here so we can hear you in the microphone.
I think in my conversations with county manager and the county attorney, preliminary conversations, I think that they have the information that they needed to provide the council with, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have for me as you deem appropriate.
Any other questions from council?
I think since there are a lot of people here tonight, and there are a lot of people probably tuned in, if you could just give us a real simple, generic, what does the process look like as far as not just the overall process, but with individual council members and districts, how do we weigh in as council members?
I think that it's important that every member of council has a good opportunity to not only understand the law related to issues like one person, one vote and compliance there under the Constitution, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, how that may affect your district, but take a look at how each district is or isn't compliant from a one person, one vote perspective post-2020 census. That's especially important in York County because York County has had such explosive growth relative to the rest of the state, and because parts of York County have grown so fast and other parts of York County have stayed about the same, that will have implications that will likely mean fairly different council map from the map that currently exists. Certainly, in the interests of representing your respective constituents, each council member will want to know as much as possible about the implications of those changes, how those changes can be made in a way that serves your constituents and is fair overall to all the people of York County and provides as little unnecessary political disruption as possible. Obviously, you've got to change district lines in response to population, but if you've been going along with the map as you are, and you have a benchmark, folks know where they live, and then all of a sudden districts are really different, each council member ought to have an opportunity to sit down and really take some time and thought about how that process affects their constituents so that they're well informed and able to make, one, a good vote, and once the council comes to consensus, each council person ought to be in a position to be able to talk in detail to their constituents to make sure everyone knows how those changes are going to affect their communities, where they're going to vote. That's a lot of general information. What that looks like specifically is I think it's important that each council member has plenty of time to meet with me or whoever you might happen to retain as much as possible so that you have as much information as possible about those changes and what are the possible ways to comply with the law. Because there's any number of different things you could do, but you want to do it in a way that, one, complies with the law, and two, serves the overall interests of York County and the individual interests of your constituents and the communities that you serve. What I would do that you might not otherwise have access to is that time with each council member so that you have the opportunity to really dive deep and see what the implications are for each community in York County. And with such dramatic changes, I think that's valuable to the county.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one quick question. So once the lines, we've determined what we want to represent as far as district-wise, and that then is sent off to the state. correct? And then
Yes.
at that point, their decision would be to agree with us or to possibly modify, if that, go ahead.
I
Mr.
mean,
Mr. Rainwater standing.
We're out of it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's your plan, whether I draw it or Mr. Opperman. You don't have to send it to the DOJ. You don't send it to us for approval. It is your plan. So you just need, you got 7 count, you need 4 votes. So after that, it's done. So, yeah, we don't have any say-so in it
From a state level?
from the state perspective.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Rainwater is certainly correct about that. I think there's value in, if my firm was retained, collaboration among my firm, the county, and RFA, because they're, frankly, what RFA does with redistricting in South Carolina is fairly unique in the country. The quality of the service provided and the commitment to service to local governments. So I think it's probably valuable for the county to take advantage of any services that RFA offers during that process as well. But what I would be able to add was that the kind of time and individual attention. RFA has 46 counties, innumerable municipalities, school districts, and public service districts to deal with, whereas I would be working directly with you. So I think there's probably great value to York County in utilizing what's available through revenue and fiscal affairs, but also retaining an individual attorney to work with you through this process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions?
I want to ask a question. This is just a generic question, maybe, and maybe for Mr. Rainwater. But so, at what point do school districts change? Is that I mean, just for clarification, because there was a lot of concern about maybe moving from a school district. They moved here for. So I'm just curious going forward, what does affect school districts?
Any elected body has the responsibility to redistrict, whether you're county, city, public, special purpose district, or school district. Traditionally, the way it's worked in South Carolina, by statute, counties, by law, you're supposed to do this by the next election. Constitutionally, everybody's required to do it by the next election. But it kind of takes time. Usually the process is the counties have elections next November. Some school districts do. Not many cities do. And so it's just kind of a cycle. The way it's usually worked is the counties get done first, then the cities, and most of the school districts will get done in 4 years. They are at risk if they don't do it sooner, but the court may may delay it. I mean, that's just how bad are they all? I mean, how bad are they off one person, one vote? But everybody's responsible to do it. How soon you do it, I would say there may be some flexibility, though. The safest action is to get it done before your next election.
That brings up the question, though. You're talking about, I think, the drawing of the lines for the seats for the school district board.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily change if you're living in the Clover School District, and next year you'll be in the York School District. It doesn't change that, it just changes the board, the seats for the board itself.
That happens when we go to a school district hearing. Everybody shows up because we're thinking we're changing districts or schools, and once we say no, it hasn't done anything about that, the audience usually leaves. So yes,
That's what I was trying to clarify.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just the seats on the board. You're not changing the lines. And with school boards, it does take a legislative act. So we work with the school boards, or consultants work with school boards, but school boards are actually a piece of legislation that has to go through the General Assembly. So with school boards, your delegation will be involved in that process too. But from a county standpoint, you're totally in charge.
Thank you, and we thank the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office for providing the benchmark data, which Council just recently got right before October 15th, and so we're moving swiftly and quickly to make sure that we do, that we get this process done and done well. Do we have a motion on the retaining of Mr. Opperman?
So, second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. At this time, we'll move to number 5, council to provide second reading of an ordinance modifying the terms and conditions for the county contract regulating the participation of nonprofit EMS providers operating within the York County 911 dispatch system in particular addressing the minimum staffing requirements to provide for basic life support personnel as may be applicable to Priority 1 and Priority 2 calls, authorizing the execution and delivery of the contract with participating EMS providers, and providing for other matters related thereto.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
I have a quick question.
Mr. Roddy?
I remember several years ago when we had a council member on here, he was real notorious about York County getting response times. Do we still get those from Piedmont and other medical providers of the time it takes to respond to certain areas?
We do get those. They're tracked by our emergency management division. So I can provide them to you if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah, so I get it. So this, again, is in regards to the balance between the EMTs and the paramedics, correct? And how it's identified based on the calls when they go out.
Yeah, in short, it allows the Lake Wiley EMS and Fort Mill EMS to utilize basic life support ambulances for Priority 2 calls.
Right.
And that is not emergency calls, transports to and from nursing homes or to clinics and things like that. Also would allow them a very small percentage of calls for Priority 1 if they were available and there were other units were not available. But currently, our contract with Piedmont, as I understand it, does allow them to supplement over and above the required number of ambulances that they have to provide with advanced life support, and that means there's a paramedic on board with basic life support. The Fort Mill EMS and Lake Wiley EMS did not have that ability to supplement their ambulance with a basic life support. This will give them that ability to do so for non-emergency calls, and like I say, a very small percentage of calls if an EMT unit is not available.
Yeah. So, thank you, David. Piedmont, it has been doing this for a bit now. Is there anything you can speak to about their record as far as how this has worked out for them in this process? And how has it improved their dispatch times?
Well, again, I think what we've heard from both Fort Mill and Lake Wiley is it gives them a little more flexibility in responding to calls. As you all know, we're having a difficulty in attracting EMTs and ambulance service, and you've heard about the longer response times, and that's due a lot in part to COVID and to the increased times they're waiting at the hospitals, so they can't free up ambulances soon enough to go on the next call. And that's coupled with the fact that there's a shortage of paramedics. So all that's works to limit our ability to provide service. So what Piedmont does is their non-emergency calls, if they have a basic life support ambulance that they can send on a call that doesn't require an EMT, they'll reserve the EMT unit for an emergency call. And that's really kind of what the Fort Mill and Lake Wiley would like to do as well.
All right. One last question. So based on that, I know that we are trying to, or we're working towards having the same opportunity from what they're doing currently at Piedmont within this district or areas. My only concern about this is that I think we need to set a benchmark on this based on them continuing to push to get paramedics in there, that we can eventually go one-to-one on the paramedics. So I think I understand the reason why they want to do this, but my concern is that we need to relook at this in X amount of time and then identify to make sure that they continue to push to get paramedics and get back to the one-to-one.
Yeah, I think the thought is when the need is less or they have a greater supply of paramedics and we don't have to do this, then we could go back to the older system of requiring an EMT on all units. But I don't know how likely that is in the next several months or probably even in the next year or two. But if that situation does present itself, then I think we could use the other standard.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we're keeping that in mind to go back and revisit this to see if we're back at that level. So if we can put something in there, that would be good. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Clearly, I think Piedmont's already doing this. This gives greater flexibility to triage calls and allows for better response times. So all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Do we have any matters for executive session?
No, ma'am.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned.